You're sitting at a red light on a Tuesday morning, coffee in one hand, your phone in the other, just glancing at a text from your wife about dinner tonight. Nothing about that moment felt dangerous. Nothing about it felt illegal. But in at least 31 states right now, that exact situation, phone in your hand, car completely stopped at a red light, is enough to earn you a ticket that starts at $150 and climbs fast on a second offense. That little gap between what you think is legal and what the law actually says right now in 2026 can cost you far more than just money. This video is about 10 driving laws that changed this year, and why missing even one of them could put you somewhere you never expected to be. Before we go any further, real quick, if you're the kind of person who actually wants to know what the law says before a police officer explains it to you on the side of the road, hit subscribe right now. I put out new videos every week, and this stuff is too important to miss. Now let's get into it. This year, 2026, a serious wave of new driving laws went into effect across the country. Some came from federal guidance that trickles down into state requirements. Some are state-by-state changes that got completely buried in the news cycle. Some are the kind of rules that feel small on paper, but turn into a massive headache the very first time you run into them at a traffic stop or in the mail. We're going to walk through all 10 right now, and we're going to spend serious time on number 3, because that one is catching people completely off guard, and almost nobody out there is explaining it correctly. Here's what these changes mean for your daily life right now. Think about every drive you take on a regular day. Your commute, the school drop-off, the quick run to the grocery store. Before this year, there was a version of how you drove that felt normal and fully legal. You thought you knew the rules, but some of those rules just quietly got updated, and nobody posted a sign on the highway to let you know. What changed is a mix of things. Stricter hands-free phone enforcement, new automated camera zones, expanded drug impairment standards, updated child passenger requirements, and new technology rules that touch almost every driver on the road. What stayed exactly the same is this. The fact that I didn't know is never an accepted defense in a traffic courtroom. Your situation today looks like this. If you're in a state that passed a full hands-free law in the last 18 months, and dozens of them did, you can be ticketed for holding your phone even if your car is sitting perfectly still at a red light. If you live near a city that restricted or banned right turns on red at certain intersections, you may have been making an illegal turn every single morning without realizing it. And if you've ever driven with illegal prescription medication in your system without understanding how the new impairment standards work in your state, you may be far more exposed than you think. The changes are real, the enforcement is active, and the time to understand this is right now, not after a police stop that starts a process you can't undo. Here's something I want you to think about. Most people who will be directly affected by these new laws will never actually sit down and look them up. They'll find out the hard way, with a fine, a point on their license, an insurance rate hike, or worse. If you're still watching right now, you are genuinely ahead of most of the drivers on the road around you. Drop a comment and tell me what state you're in. I'm curious how many of you are in places where these new rules hit the hardest. And while you're down there, hit the like button so more drivers can find this video before it's too late for them. Let's go through all 10. Number 1 is the hands-free expansion that swept through states over the last year and a half. The concept of hands-free laws isn't new. States like Georgia and California were doing this years ago. But what is new in 2026 is how many additional states joined in and how tight the language in those updated laws actually got. We're not talking just about no phone calls while driving anymore. In several newly updated state statutes, the rule now covers any physical contact with your phone at all. Holding it up, tapping the screen, even resting it on your lap and glancing at it. The old loophole that let people argue they were just holding the phone and not actively using it is gone in most of these new versions. Some of the updated laws specifically removed language that had previously exempted drivers sitting in a stopped vehicle. If your car is in a travel lane, stopped or moving, the rule applies to you. Number 2 is the rapid expansion of automated speed enforcement, specifically inside work zones and school zones. This one spread fast because the political resistance to speed cameras in general remains strong across most of the country, but it's a much harder argument to make when the cameras are specifically there to protect construction workers and children. In the past 2 years, at least 19 states passed legislation that allowed or significantly expanded automated camera enforcement in these specific zones. In 2026, the majority of those programs went fully operational. What that means for you in practical terms is that you can receive a citation in the mail 2 weeks after you drove through a work zone doing 5 miles over the posted limit. There are no flashing lights behind you. There's no officer on the side of the road. You just find an envelope in your mailbox one afternoon. Fines in most of these programs start around $50 for a first offense and jump to $300 or more when construction workers are actually present and documented on site. Now here is number 3. This is the change that is catching real people completely off guard all over the country, and it is the one that almost every other channel is either getting wrong or not covering at all. In 2026, more than a dozen states updated or passed new laws around driving while impaired that specifically address legally purchased cannabis and certain prescription medications. Here's the core of the problem. The old standard everyone is familiar with was built around alcohol, the 0.08 blood alcohol level that's been drilled into drivers for decades. But there was never an equivalent clear national standard for marijuana impairment or prescription drug impairment, and courts and prosecutors have been fighting over the line for years. What changed in 2026 is that several states moved to something called a per se impairment law for THC. That means if any detectable level of THC, or in some states a specific nanogram number, shows up in your blood during a traffic stop, you can be charged with impaired driving. Even if you used a completely legal cannabis product the night before, even if you feel perfectly fine right now, even if there is no visible sign of impairment whatsoever. The reason this is so significant comes down to biology and timing. THC metabolites stay in your bloodstream for days, sometimes weeks, after use, long after any actual impairment has worn off completely. This is nothing like alcohol, where the substance processes out of your system within hours. Drivers who legally use cannabis on a Friday evening have been flagged under these new per se laws on a Monday morning with zero signs of active impairment. Legal professionals and scientists are deeply divided on whether these laws are scientifically sound or constitutionally fair, and multiple court challenges are already moving through the lower courts in affected states. But here is what matters to you right now. Those laws are on the books, and they are being actively enforced today. If your state recently adopted a per se THC threshold, you need to know exactly what that number is and what it means for how long after use you are potentially exposed. Number 4 covers the right turn on red restrictions that have been spreading from city to city. Washington, D.C. banned right turn on red at the vast majority of its intersections a couple of years ago, and other cities followed that lead. In 2026, several municipalities and a handful of states added new signage requirements and specific restrictions on right turns on red in dense urban areas, near school zones, and anywhere adjacent to a protected bike lane. This isn't a nationwide ban. There's no federal law saying you can never turn right on red. But if you're driving in a city you don't normally navigate, visiting family, attending a conference, on a work trip, you may roll through a restricted intersection with a sign you simply didn't notice, and a camera may have captured it perfectly. The simple rule of thumb going forward is this: in an unfamiliar urban area, treat every red light as potentially restricted until you can confirm the intersection clearly allows a right turn. Number 5 is about electric vehicles and new state-level registration and equipment requirements that took effect this year. Several states updated their EV-specific regulations in 2026, and the changes include new charging equipment certification standards, registration fees structured differently from traditional gas vehicle fees, and in a small number of states, new visible identification requirements for the vehicle itself. This one is narrower in scope. It applies specifically to EV owners, but the EV owner population is growing rapidly, and the updated rules apply to vehicles that were purchased before these requirements ever existed. If you own an electric vehicle and haven't checked whether your state passed any EV-specific rule updates in the past 12 months, that's worth 15 minutes of your time before your next registration comes due. Number 6 is the expansion of how distracted driving is legally defined. This is connected to the hands-free laws, but it's a meaningfully different piece of the puzzle. Several state legislatures updated their distracted driving statutes in 2026 to specifically name smartwatches, built-in dashboard GPS units, and in-vehicle entertainment screens as devices that can form the basis of a distracted driving charge. The original distracted driving laws were drafted at a time when the concern was almost entirely about handheld smartphones, but courts started seeing cases where drivers were interacting with their Garmin or their car's built-in touchscreen or their Apple Watch in the seconds before an accident, and the older statutory language didn't cleanly reach that behavior. The updated laws try to close that gap. What this means for you right now is that telling an officer, "I wasn't on my phone," is no longer automatically a clean defense if you were visibly engaging with any other electronic device at the wheel. Number 7 is updated child passenger safety requirements that went into effect across several states. This one gets far less attention in driving news coverage than it deserves. Multiple states updated the age, weight, and height thresholds for car seats and booster seats in 2026, raising the minimum size at which a child is legally permitted to move from rear-facing to forward-facing and from a booster seat to a standard seatbelt. If you had the previous requirements memorized from when an older child was young and you're now applying them to a younger sibling, don't assume the numbers haven't changed. States including Massachusetts, Oregon, and Illinois made specific updates to these requirements within the past year. The fines for violations are a real concern, but from a legal standpoint, being out of compliance with child passenger safety laws at the time of any accident creates an entirely different level of legal exposure beyond a simple traffic citation. Number 8 covers commercial-style driving regulations that are now reaching people who never considered themselves commercial drivers. When most people hear the words commercial driver rules, they assume it doesn't apply to them, but several states broadened the relevant definitions this year. Drivers who regularly use their personal vehicle for rideshare or delivery work, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, are now subject to updated rules in some states around insurance disclosure at registration, hours of activity reporting requirements, and in a small number of cases, new license endorsement standards. If you drive for any of these platforms, even on a part-time basis, and you're in one of the states that updated these rules this year, the assumption that your personal license covers everything, the same way it used to, may no longer be accurate. Number 9 is about speed limiter technology and the federal regulatory groundwork being built right now. Here's what most people are missing on this one. The actual hard mandate for speed limiters on regular passenger vehicles hasn't fully arrived in the United States the way it already has in Europe. But in 2026, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration finalized new rulemaking language that clearly sets the stage for broader adoption. Several major automakers simultaneously began equipping new 2026 model year vehicles with intelligent speed assistance technology, ISA, as a standard or near standard feature. This system alerts you when you exceed the posted limit, and in some vehicle configurations gently reduces throttle response. It's not a hard lockout. It's not mandatory across all consumer vehicles yet. But the regulatory intent and the commercial momentum are both clearly moving in the same direction, and several states are already drafting legislation to require ISA in state and commercial vehicle fleets first. Number 10 is about new guidance and laws around semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicle features. And this one matters even if you don't own a high-end vehicle. In 2026, the NHTSA finalized updated guidance requiring automakers to more clearly communicate to buyers exactly what their driver assistance systems can and cannot do, and it clarified the legal distinction between Level 2 and Level 3 autonomous capability. In plain English, that means the question of who is legally responsible when something goes wrong in a car using autonomous features is starting to be more sharply defined. And several states passed laws this year making it explicitly illegal to be seated in the driver's position with autonomous features engaged, unless you are immediately capable of taking full manual control, meaning no sleeping, no sustained phone use, no moving away from the controls. These laws are being enforced, and citations have already been issued in multiple states this year. In just a minute, I'm going to cover something that almost every other explanation of these new laws completely overlooks, specifically how they interact with your rights at a traffic stop and what you can legally do when a new law is applied to you incorrectly. It's a detail that could matter a great deal depending on your exact situation. Make sure notifications are turned on so you don't miss any video I put out. Now let's keep going. Let's talk about what people are getting flat out wrong about all of this, because the internet has already produced a mountain of bad information and half-truths around these new laws. The first big myth is that traffic laws don't apply to you when your car isn't moving. A lot of drivers genuinely believe that traffic enforcement only kicks in when a vehicle is in motion. This has been wrong for a long time, and the new hands-free and device laws make the misunderstanding even more expensive. If your car is stopped at a traffic light, sitting in an active travel lane, or paused in a lane of traffic, that is not a legal free zone. Courts have been consistent on this for years, and the new statutes in most states were written specifically to remove any remaining ambiguity about stopped vehicles. Being stopped doesn't create a legal bubble around you. The law still applies. The second major myth is about the cannabis impairment laws specifically. A lot of people are claiming online that per se THC laws are unconstitutional and therefore can't really be enforced right now. Here's what's actually true. Those laws are being challenged in courts. A handful of early cases at the trial level have produced mixed results, but these laws are actively on the books, actively being applied, and actively producing real consequences for real drivers right now, while those legal challenges work their way through the system over months and years. The fact that a law is being litigated does not mean it is suspended. If you drive in a state with an active per se THC threshold, and you get charged under it, you will be navigating the same court process as everyone else who relied on they can't really enforce that and found out they were wrong. The third myth is the idea that all these new laws are just government revenue grabs and courts throw them out constantly. There is a tiny sliver of truth in there that people are stretching into a conclusion that will hurt them. Yes, specific speed camera programs in isolated jurisdictions have been challenged and in rare cases paused. That's real. But the overwhelming majority of the 2026 driving law changes are surviving review because they follow legal frameworks and constitutional patterns that courts have accepted many times over many years. Telling yourself the courts always throw these out is the same as telling yourself you don't need to pay attention, and that kind of thinking leads to standing in a traffic courtroom without a real defense. The informed driver is always in a better position than the driver who assumed someone else would sort it out. Now let's look at what's coming next, because everything we've covered today is really just the front edge of a much larger shift in how driving gets regulated in this country over the next 5 to 10 years. The most significant trend to watch closely is the continued expansion of automated enforcement technology. Speed cameras and red light cameras are still politically controversial in many states, but the data coming out of the work zone and school zone programs is showing measurable reductions in accidents and fatalities in those areas. That data is making the political argument against expansion harder to sustain. In the next few years, watch for automated camera enforcement to begin appearing on regular highway stretches in at least several states, and the federal government is already collecting the data infrastructure to support that expansion at the policy level. Here's what most people are completely missing about the per se THC impairment laws going forward. This legal battle is nowhere close to over. The science behind what nanogram threshold actually correlates with measurable impairment is still genuinely contested because cannabis processes differently in different bodies depending on tolerance, use frequency, body composition, and metabolism. States that rush to adopt a specific number are going to face increasingly serious legal challenges as those cases develop and as more peer-reviewed research on THC pharmacology becomes available. What this likely sets up over the next few years is either a national standardized framework that replaces the current patchwork of state-by-state thresholds, or a meaningful rollback of per se laws in favor of performance-based impairment assessment, roadside sobriety tests that measure actual function rather than blood chemistry. In the next few months, pay attention to what comes out of appellate courts in Colorado, Washington, and Illinois specifically. Those states are where the most significant active litigation sits right now. The speed limiter and ISA conversation is going to accelerate noticeably within the next 12 to 24 months. By next year, the majority of major automakers will have some version of ISA as either standard or widely available on new models. Within 2 to 3 years, the regulatory expectation is that NHTSA will push from voluntary adoption towards something closer to a mandate, starting with government and commercial fleets, then moving toward consumer vehicles. This is the same exact trajectory we saw with seatbelt laws, then airbag requirements, then backup cameras. All of them faced real resistance before becoming universal expectations that nobody questions anymore. The political pushback on speed limiters will be significant and loud, and Congress will weigh in. But the direction the technology and the regulatory intent are moving is unmistakable. This one is coming. Watch also in the next 12 months for significant court decisions around autonomous vehicle liability. Who is legally responsible when a car driving itself gets into an accident? The person in the seat, the automaker, the software company? That question is currently unanswered at both the state and federal levels in any consistent way. Multiple major lawsuits involving autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicles are currently in active litigation and approaching trial or verdict stages. The states that step up and pass clear autonomous vehicle liability frameworks in the next legislative cycle will set precedents that cascade through the rest of the country, whether other states like it or not. This one is worth following closely. Now let's bring all of this home, because the most important part of this video is what you do with it. The 3 things that matter most from everything we covered today are these. First, holding your phone at a red light is no longer a gray area in most of the country. The stopped car exemption that used to exist in a lot of state hands-free laws is largely gone. If your phone needs your attention badly enough to look at, the legal move is to pull into a parking lot first. Second, the new impairment rules, especially around THC, operate on a fundamentally different logic than anything you grew up hearing about DUI laws. Legal personal use the night before can still create legal exposure the next morning in states with active per se thresholds. Knowing your specific state's standard on this is not optional anymore. It's part of being a legally protected driver. Third, Automated enforcement is expanding into the spaces where drivers have historically been most relaxed about small violations: work zones, school zones, dense city intersections. There is no officer there to exercise discretion. There is only a camera, a database, and an envelope on its way to your mailbox. These laws affect more than just your drive to work. They affect what your teenager encounters the first time they get behind the wheel without you in the car. They affect what happens to your insurance rates when points start stacking up from violations you didn't even know you were committing. They affect your family's stability in ways that seem invisible until they aren't. You now know things that the majority of drivers sharing the road with you today have never taken 20 minutes to understand. That's not nothing. What you do with that knowledge, whether you change a habit, look up your state's specific rules, have a conversation with your family tonight, that's what turns information into actual protection. You took the time to learn this today. Most people won't. That makes a real difference. For you, for your family, and for everyone in the car with you. Subscribe if you haven't yet, turn on the bell so you never miss a new video, and drop a comment below telling me which of these 10 laws genuinely surprised you. I read every single one. See you in the next one.